The committee will now come to order. I note that a quorum is present and that each member has been provided the material on our agenda today. And now I recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, we will consider a resolution from Representative Sanford Bishop of Georgia, giving well-earned respect to our great blueberry farmers. America is the #1 producer of blueberries, and within the nation, my great state of Georgia is the #1 state producer of blueberries. You find Georgia blueberries around the world, and I am proud of our blueberry producers who make this happen. We will also mark up Mr. Jimmy Panetta's bill of California on Agriculture Affairs Rescue Act. Agriculture affairs, as you know, exist in all of our states and are very important to inspiring young people to pursue careers in agriculture, which is very important for the future of America's agriculture industry. And now I yield to our ranking member for any open remarks he would like to make.
Well, Chairman, thank you very much. Look forward to the markup. I would be remiss, Mr. Chairman, if I didn't express my continued disappointment in the reconciliation process, which continues to tarnish this committee's reputation of bipartisanship and decorum. I'm also frustrated by the fact that we were not able to adopt absolutely any of the common sense production agriculture really pro-production agriculture amendments that we put forward because of concerns of adding new authorizations beyond what the Senate or the House Democratic leadership wanted, of spending $1 more than $3.5 million. That really was upsetting because I found that $3.5 million bill, because of the other committee's work, is now $4.3 million with some new authorizations added. I'm also frustrated and frankly surprised that we're here today to mark up a bill and a resolution that had nothing to do with the missing $28 billion you referenced last week. And I hope you can shed some light on status and what either the Budget or the Rules Committee will be contemplating a jurisdiction. Mr. Chairman, I have obvious reservations about the proceedings today because of that, and on the heels of the majority's reconciliation shenanigans, and admit Congress has seen little interaction with the administration or with issues important to production agriculture. I can only hope my calls for the committee to fulfill its obligation have not been ignored, and when we don't work together, we're doing a major disservice to the communities that we represent. And again, hope that we can reestablish the committee's commitment to rural America, production agriculture, and work to better the lives of all within it. And for more detailed remarks, I'll submit those for the record. With that, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair would request that any other members submit their opening statements for the record.
Is this something I can do?
Without objection, the chair may recess the committee. May I ask and remind members to please mute your phones. Please mute your phones, members. Thank you. Thank you. Without objection, the chair may recess the committee subject to the call of the chair at any point during.
Mr. Chairman, can we get this thing straight so that we can actually hear before we move any further, please?
Yeah, I think we do. They've gotten unmuted. Let me remind everybody, that's a good example of why I keep saying, members, please unmute yourselves when you speak, mute yourselves when you finish speaking. Now, I would like to remind members that only amendments germane to the subject matter before us today shall be in order. No motion or proposition on a subject different than that under consideration shall be submitted under the color of amendment. Members are reminded again to unmute yourselves when recognized to speak and appear on the screen and when you are called to vote. Otherwise, please keep your phones muted so we can move graciously ahead. And now we turn our attention to the business at hand, HR Resolution 271. We now have before us for consideration this resolution recognizing the importance of the blueberry industry in the United States and supporting the designation of July 2021 as National Blueberry Month. Without objections, the Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research is discharged from further consideration of Resolution 271. And without objection, the first reading of the resolution is now waived, and it is open for amendments at any point. I now recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H Resolution 271, which is now at the desk. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is waived, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purpose of further amendments. And now I recognize the sponsor of the resolution, our colleague on the Agriculture Committee and chairman of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Sanford Bishop, to now speak on his resolution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your leadership and stewardship of this committee. The work that you do is so important, and it impacts every American every single day. I'm proud to introduce this resolution today, which recognizes the contributions of American blueberry growers and their families to our agriculture economy. I want to thank Representative Fred Upton for his leadership on this issue in previous Congresses, and I also want to thank Representative Pingree for her input, which has been incorporated into the bill in the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The United States is the world's largest producer of blueberries, accounting for over half of the global production. And I'm very honored to live and to represent a state that is arguably number one in blueberries, Mr. Chairman, although we certainly are in the top 5 blueberry states without a shadow of a doubt. Growers of U.S. high bush blueberries generate more than $4.7 billion in annual economic impact, translating into more than $12.7 million flowing into the U.S. economy every day of every year. Blueberries are often labeled a superfood because they're full of antioxidants, and they're known as juicy fruits, which are great for weight loss or maintenance because they contain mostly water. Research also suggests that the compounds found in blueberries may delay the effects of vascular dementia or Alzheimer's disease. In addition to these healthy highlights, we all can recall enjoying a blueberry dessert with family or friends or for the holidays or just for fun, from cutchins and cobblers to pies and muffins. I'm pleased to have the support of the North American Blueberry Council, and I'm grateful for my colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, who have co-sponsored this resolution, including my good friend, Representative Shelley Pingree, whose state of Maine contains 98% of our nation's wild blueberry acres. The Senate has already passed a resolution to recognize July as National Blueberry Month. I look forward to House passage of this resolution as it will coincide with the traditional culmination of the blueberry harvest in September. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Thompson, for considering this resolution today, which means so very much to our U.S. blueberry growers, the fruits of whose labor are enjoyed by people all across the world. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Pursuant to Committee Rule 3I and House Rule 11, Clause 2, the chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting any amendment on which a recorded vote is ordered. Before we begin with amendments, does any member wish to speak on the resolution?
Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, sir.
All right, we'll get everybody in order. Miss, pardon?
Mr. Johnson is South Dakota Commission. So it's Johnson and Feenstra?
Okay, Mr. Johnson,
For what purpose does Mr. Johnson seek?
for what purpose does Mr. Johnson seek a recognition?
I'd like to claim my 5 minutes on the ANS, sir.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, what are we doing here? I mean, I understand the importance of blueberries, but you look at the jurisdiction of this committee and what rages in this country. We have half of this nation in D2 drought or worse. We have wildfires that rage throughout the West. We have a $50 billion threat with the name African swine fever that knocks on our doorstep. And we have mandatory price reporting, which would address serious deficiencies in our cattle marketplace. And that mandatory price reporting expires in 9 days.
Not that has sought yet.
This committee has had 2 years and 9 months under the leadership of the Democrats to bring up mandatory price reporting, which expired last year. The extension expires in 9 days, and yet we are not doing the very real work on that issue. Instead, we are gathered today to do as the chairman said, to bring well-earned respect to blueberries. This is a committee that has been known for meaningful bipartisan work on serious issues that face this country. And when I look at all of the good bipartisan legislation that we could be marking up today, Mr. O'Halloran's and Ms. Hartler's Flexible Financing for Rural America Act, Mr. Westerman's Trillion Trees Act with 101 bipartisan co-sponsors, Mr. Panetta's REPANT Act, the bill that I have with Representative Craig to provide CRP flexibility, the Butcher Block Act that I've done with Abigail Spanberger, the DIRECT Act, which I've done with Representative Cuellar, Mr. Bost's Veterans Agricultural Apprenticeship Act. These are serious pieces of legislation for serious times. And I am sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I cannot understand why, instead of dealing with ASF, wildfires, drought, or mandatory price reporting, we are trying to earn respect for the blueberry. I hope tomorrow brings more serious work for this committee, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman yields back. Is there anyone else who seeks recognition?
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Adams of North Carolina, you're recognized.
thank you, Chairman Scott. I would like to strike the last word. I think this is a good bill. I want to thank my colleague, Sanford, for sponsoring it. Through my district, although my district is substantially urban and suburban, I do understand the important role that North Carolina blueberry producers play in my state and in the national economy. According to USDA's Economic Research Service, blueberry production has increased fivefold to meet the growing demand among American consumers over the last decade. In 2020, North Carolina produced over 32.6 million pounds of blueberries, bringing in nearly $50 million to the state economy. We need that, and we're very appreciative. September typically marks the end of the blueberry harvest season, and so this resolution is timely. And again, I appreciate the sponsor for bringing it forward. As a diabetic myself, my doctor has always suggested that blueberries would be good for my diet, and so I'm doing more of that. But I'm proud to support the resolution, and I urge my colleagues to support it as well. Mr. Chairman, I thank you again, and I yield back.
Does any other member seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Move to strike the last word, either way.
Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm struggling, and I associate myself with comments of Mr. Johnson. I'm struggling to understand the priorities of this commitment. Just under 2 weeks ago, we spent 9 hours on a Friday marking up an irresponsible bill that the majority supported so much that they decided to recess and return days later to pass. My Republican colleagues and I offered multiple good amendments on issues that have historically received bipartisan support from this committee. As an example, the Rural Act, which provides much-needed assistance to rural utilities in times of emergency. I know my Democrat friends support keeping the lights on and water running for their constituents, but they voted against it anyway. Today, we're marking up a resolution designating a month that has already passed as National Blueberry Month. What? How does that help our constituents in rural America who struggled long before the pandemic and were hit hardest last year? I don't necessarily have anything against recognizing our blueberry growers or assisting local fairs. God bless the blueberry growers. I love county fairs. But I'm struggling to understand the plan for the direction of this committee. Of note, this year we have considered 2 irresponsible partisan reconciliation bills and 1 good disaster assistance bill. That's what we've done in 9 months. We have family farms barely in business. As the gentleman from South Dakota indicated, African swine fever is now in our hemisphere, bearing down on our continent. Inflation hitting every single American, and if it hasn't escaped your attention, cyber attacks on critical ag infrastructure as recently as yesterday. A co-op in Iowa was targeted. And here we are recognizing National Blueberry Month. Let me say for the record, love blueberries. Love county fairs. And I intend to say yes to these bills. But Mr. Chairman, please provide some reassurance that we're going to get focused on what this committee is all about. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Is there anyone else seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chair.
Mr.
The
Chair.
gentlewoman from Maine, Ms. Pingree, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I certainly appreciate, I move to strike the last word. I certainly appreciate this opportunity to speak on the bill today, and I thank you for taking up this bill. I thank Chairman Bishop, who I'm fortunate enough to work with on the Ag Appropriations Committee as well, to understanding the importance of Maine blueberries and including wild blueberries into this resolution. I certainly enjoy cultivated blueberries, and I'm pleased for all the states that do so well with them, and we grow a few on our farm as well. But the importance in Maine is our wild blueberry crop. We have over 500 wild blueberry growers, and those businesses contribute an estimated $250 million to our economy in a small state of only 1.3 million people. So you can see how important this is to our agricultural sector. Wild blueberries are different. They're cultivated in a different way. They have very high antioxidant properties, and they're a particularly great blueberry that needs to be alongside of all the cultivated blueberries that we're recognizing today. So I'm grateful for this acknowledgement. I know many of you haven't had the chance to try a wild blueberry, but for those of you who serve on appropriations with me, you'll recall this summer we had the chance to sample some blueberry pies from my state, and I know that's what got Mr. Bishop to understand how important it was to include this. And I just want to make the offer in the spirit of bipartisanship on this committee. Anyone who needs a blueberry pie and who will feel better having a blueberry pie, I'm happy to bring them to the committee or to any of your offices, because they are something to be tasted and something very different. And I would just say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who I'm happy to work with on so many issues, I believe that many of the concerns that you are bringing up today were addressed in our long markup of the other day, where we experienced very little bipartisan cooperation. And I think if you look through the things that we're doing in our reconciliation bill, in our infrastructure bill, you'll find that there's a tremendous amount of support for the huge concerns our farmers are dealing with. And I urge you all to support those measures when they come to the floor. With that, I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. Who else seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Scott from Georgia, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr.
does
Chairman.
the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, is it not true that at approximately 4:30 today, we will have a vote on the floor that will actually suspend the debt limit until December, not of 2021, but 2022 is what the Democratic Party has put in the language? Is that correct?
I assume so.
Yes, sir. That's absolutely what the Democratic Party is doing. Would the chair of the committee, who I deeply respect, would you be willing to share with us the language on the $28 billion in conservation, as the Democratic Party is referring to it as conservation, that left the committee? I find it hard to believe that the Democrats would have voted to pass the language if the Democratic Party members of this committee had not seen that. When can the Republican members of the committee see the $28 billion language for conservation, for agriculture? When can the Republicans see that language?
They will see it when the Budget Committee has worked the budget reconciliation bill out, and we all will see it.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, that is an Ag Committee responsibility, not a Budget Committee responsibility. And
However,
have the Democrats on the Ag Committee seen the $28 billion language?
I have seen it, and let me remind
Okay.
the gentleman, this is the bill.
Yes, sir.
Budget, reconciliation. All of our committees are putting in the information, and the Budget Committee will release it at the appropriate time.
Mr. Chairman, you acknowledge that you have seen the language. You're the chairman of this committee. Do you not think that the other members, let me ask you this, have you shared the language with the other Democrats on the committee?
Mr. Scott, this is a resolution on blueberries. Let us get this resolution
Mr. Chairman.
secured.
Mr. Chairman,
Now,
with all due
Mr. Scott,
respect.
let me finish, all right? You have gone through this maneuver over and over again when we were dealing with the issue last week. Now,
Mr. Chairman, have you
and
shared
I
the
answer
language?
you the same thing.
Have you shared the language with the Democratic members of the Ag Committee, or are you the sole person of the Ag Committee that has seen the language? Have the Democrats on the Ag Committee seen the language?
I'm very delighted to have this bill before us.
Have the Democrats on the, Mr. Chairman, it's an honest question. Have the Democrats on the Ag Committee seen the language?
That's not privy for me to say at this time. We are now dealing with.
Mr. Chairman, with all due
very-
respect, we have a democracy, and our democracy requires those of us who are entrusted with the position of being a member of Congress to have the facts before we vote. Now, either you acknowledge that you've seen the language and you acknowledge that you have not cared enough to share that language with the Republicans on the committee. You're about to go out there and vote to waive the debt limit until December of 2022. And yet this piece of legislation, which is fine with me, but let's acknowledge, this doesn't give a single dime to a blueberry farmer. We'll get to run an ad. Those of us who support blueberries will get to go out and that members of the Ag Committee get to cut an ad and say, hey, join me in National Blueberry Month. I'm going to buy some extra ones for my kids today. But the fact of the matter is what you're doing, you passed $28 billion out of this committee in a blank check that you've seen that you won't share with us. You acknowledge that you've seen it. And to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, I wonder have you shared it with the other members, with the other Democrats, or did the Democrats just vote for it without even knowing what was in it? Did the Democrats vote for it without knowing what was in it, or did the Democrats get to see the language and just the Republicans not get to see the language? Ladies and gentlemen, you know, The Democratic Party is going to walk out there at 4:30 and vote to suspend the debt limit without any budget. It's a very dangerous time in this country when one party gets to see the language and the other party doesn't.
Is there any other member?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, Vicky Hartzler.
Mr. Sutherland of the Northern Marietta Islands, you are now recognized. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this resolution and also will support the bill before us and today's markup. We all take pride in so many of our district or our state products. Like I say, a state dish, a dish from the Northern Mariana Islands, when we had that annual competition for a dish from each of the state and the territories, that a state dish made of young coconut actually came in #1 in the nation. I was so proud, I tell you, I was walking on clouds. And I like to recognize blueberry dish. Blueberries and blueberry dish, they do have really good, there are good products that help our health. I certainly need help with my health. And I don't see why we should again argue over, whether we've seen a bill, whether we've not seen a bill. I'm not going to share with the gentleman if I did have seen the bill. But I think we need to move on and pass this resolution, Mr. Chairman, and pass the next bill on the agenda, and so we could get back to other important matters. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other member seek
Yes.
recognition? Ms. Hutzler from Missouri, you're recognized. For what purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
So I have a parliamentary inquiry first. The substitute, it was not distributed. So what was in the substitute? You said that you're offering a substitute and then that it'll be marked as read. So what is the substitute?
As you may know, Congress-lady, it was emailed to all of our members' office.
Okay, I got a substitute offered by Mr. Bishop, not you.
It was posted by the clerk.
By you? So,
The clerk.
So who offered the substitute, you or Mr. Bishop? You said it was you, but what I got
No,
said it was from Mr. Bishop.
It is Mr. Bishop's bill to the committee, which we're offering.
Well, it sounds like it was done incorrectly. That motion was incorrect because it wasn't a substitute offered by you. It was offered by Mr. Bishop, at least what I've been provided. Did it change the date of the Blueberry Month? Because the way I read the bill, it designated Blueberry Month July of 2021, which is already passed. So did it change the date?
It did not change the date.
So we're spending time here voting on a bill to designate Blueberry Month, which I love blueberries, but for a month that's already passed. So how could we celebrate a month that's already passed? That's just kind of questioning. You said it passed the Senate. When did it arrive from the Senate here?
It's to make July 2021 National Blueberry Month, offered by Mr. Bishop. It's a House resolution, not a Senate resolution. There is a bill in the Senate.
So why did it's now on September?
When did it arrive?
Sorry.
If the Senate passed it, when did it arrive? Did it arrive before July?
We're not taking Mr. Bishop's House resolution.
Yeah. We're taking up Mr. Bishop's bill.
So you can't answer when it arrived from the Senate? That should be a very easy question.
Do we know when it arrived?
Did it arrive in April? When did the Senate pass this? Could somebody Google it?
Yeah. I think there's some confusion here.
I think so.
I think that this is a House resolution that Mr. Bishop is offering that recognizes the month of July as Blueberry Month.
Okay, it's already passed. I just have to say, to Mr. Johnson's points and the points that have been made, the priorities of this committee just continue to baffle me. I have a bill that is a bipartisan bill with Tom O'Halloran to provide flexible financing for rural America to help our rural electric cooperatives with 186 co-sponsors, including many members of this committee, that would save $20 billion for our rural electric cooperatives, help them to put in broadband, help them to lower the rates for their customers. And yet we haven't taken up that bill. So we are debating a bill to designate a month on blueberries from a month that's already passed. I just am baffled by this and encourage you, Mr. Chairman, to bring up and have hearings and pass bills that are needed in rural America rather than just taking up small bills where the deadline has already passed. And I yield back.
Thank you. Who else seeks recognition?
Chairman?
Mr. Frenstra, you're recognized. For what purpose do you seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Thompson. I want to echo what Congressman Johnson has said. I live in the breadbasket to the world. I live in the state of Iowa, which we rank number 1 or 2 in soybeans and corn and cattle and hogs and eggs and dairy and you name it. And we have all these significant issues. As many of you know, the African swine fever was recently discovered in the Dominican Republic. For the first time in 40 years, this disease has been detected in the Western Hemisphere, and we haven't touched this. And all our hog producers are in fear of this, and yet we're not doing anything. Last week, we talked about an amendment. It was my amendment, and it got completely voted down, which, we went through these issues last week, but it's like, please, I'm begging here, we got to do something. Additionally, the window of the opportunity on the livestock mandatory reporting program is quickly closing, 7 days left, and yet that's not up today. I'm telling you, with all the independent cattle producers that I have in my district, this is a very serious issue. That we have to know what the increased packer margins are. I'm here on the Ag Committee to say, hey, we've got to do ag items. We've got to address these issues, and if we don't, there's going to be severe consequences. So I humbly ask my colleagues that we look to do these things in the next several weeks. Thank you, and I yield back.
Who seeks recognition? Mr. Cloud of Texas. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Just to speak to the bill.
The gentleman is recognized.
I'd just like to echo the thoughts of the members that have spoken before me. It's extremely odd that we are naming a month that has passed already. Is it the chair's understanding as well that we can also change budgets from the past or farm bills from the past? It seems that we should be looking forward in whatever that we're doing. Namely, we have a farm bill coming up in just the next year or two, and we have done nothing in this committee to begin to prepare for that. We should be having hearings, we should be having briefings, we should be doing a whole lot of work to get ready for that. And so far we've done is 2 reconciliation bills that were very partisan. The one amendment that had gotten through on a bipartisan vote was taken out in Rules Committee before it went to the floor for a vote. And for all I appreciate the kind demeanor, but we need to see bipartisan action in this committee. This committee's been known for that. I was looking for that when I was added to this committee, and we haven't seen that yet. I'd like us to get back to the real work and focusing on months, naming months ceremoniously that have happened in the past already. I'm not even sure how we would celebrate that. So I yield back. Thank you.
Any other member seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hagedorn,
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. I agree with Congressman Feenstra. There's some things going on, particularly in areas that I represent, southern Minnesota, in northern Iowa, with our hog producers. That African swine fever, we've been talking about this for a number of years. We should spend some time getting the Agriculture Department, DHS, and others in here to let us know what's the plan. Are they doing better at our inspecting our ports? Are they doing better with our beagle brigades? What are we going to do if it does creep into the United States? What's the plan? And also, we should be looking at some things that are going on in agriculture where they're, I guess, now considering not paying our pork producers that $17 top-off payment. Where'd that come from? I thought we passed a bill and said they needed to do that. Now, arbitrarily, they just don't think they need to pay off those farmers for the things that they went through during COVID. That's something that we should be looking at. I agree with Congressman Johnson as well. There's a lot of things that we could be doing proactively to help farmers and agribusinesses, and I sure hope we can get moving towards that in the near future. But right now, you know what I'd settle for? I'd settle for doing no harm to the farmers and agribusinesses. I'd settle for maybe backing off what's going on with the Democrat Party and their reconciliation bill, which in it has a war on agriculture. Higher taxes. I don't know anybody in the farming community that's begging for more taxes. I've never had a farmer come up to me and say, could you raise my taxes? It's great for my bottom line. It's going to be great for the longevity of my farm and for my business. What about, we know what's going on over there with regulations, waters of the United States, the Biden administration going to try and reimpose what Obama was doing. We had that fixed with President Trump. That's not a good thing. Make the EPA more powerful over our farmers, and that's just one regulation out of hundreds and hundreds that are coming after them. Energy. You know, this climate change nonsense that's in these bills is just going to drive up the cost of electricity and fuel and fertilizer for our farmers and agribusinesses, transportation, at no benefit. It's not going to stop fires and everything else like they say. It's just going to drive up our costs, make us less competitive. 40% of the cost of growing a bushel of corn is energy. How is it going to help our farmers if we continue to drive up those costs? And trade, well, we don't know where the administration really is on trade. Hopefully they'll follow the last administration. But when you put this all together, that's a war on agriculture. That's not good for our farmers. I don't think farmers are out there demanding this stuff. I haven't had one come up to me. And I know we're here to talk about the blueberries, and they're wonderful. But frankly, the majority party in this Congress is giving our farmers the raspberries. I yield back.
Any other member seek recognition? Hearing no for
Dawn Bacon, Nebraska.
Mr. Bacon, Nebraska, for what purpose you seek
I want to address the
recognition?
committee for 5 minutes.
You're recognized.
Thank you very much. I intend to support the bill. I know blueberries are important, but it is ironic that we're doing something that's 2 months old. It's passed 2 months ago. I mean, you can't make this up on Saturday Night Live, frankly. And I feel like there is misplaced priorities here. You know, there's been 2 recent newspaper articles saying that the 117th Congress, particularly the House, has done record low numbers of oversight hearings on the administration, record low. And we have an oversight committee here, and we've done 0 oversight hearings on the 2018 Farm Bill. And I think it's very important. So and as already mentioned, the swine fever is a grave threat to our agriculture. Where have we put any time on that? This committee stood up and did great work on the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank to address that. We should be doing the same kind of focus on on the African swine fever, and which, by the way, gravely harmed the Asian pork industry. It could do that here as well. So, Mr. Chair, I just say I think this is some misplaced priorities. So I'm going to support the legislation. Blueberries are important, but it's 2 months. It happened 2 months ago, and there's bigger priorities staring us in the face. I yield back.
Any other member? The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Carey, you're recognized.
Thank
For
you.
what purpose do you seek recognition?
I seek recognition in support of the Blueberry Bill. I appreciate Mr. Bishop bringing this, and I think it is important that we do these resolutions to recognize our producers. But, Mr. Chairman, I have to echo the comments of many of my colleagues. We have serious business that needs to be addressed. We need to be talking about doing something in this committee to prevent the administration from doing the step-up basis, which is going to destroy our farmers. We need to do something about the wildfires and the destruction and the hurricanes that have destroyed crops throughout the South and the flooding. We need to worry about how we're going to spend that CFAP money, how we're going to move that forward that hasn't been spent, and make sure that we do the right things. We need to worry about the African swine fever. We need to make sure that we get rural broadband to all our farmers and all our children that need those for educational, especially in today's COVID world. Mr. Chairman, this is a very honorable thing. I don't really care about the date as much as everyone else. I think it's important that we recognize our producers and that they're good things. But, Mr. Chairman, we also have a duty and an obligation to the American people and to our American farmers to make sure that some of that money goes to production agriculture in this huge reconciliation budget bill, and none of that goes to production agriculture. We have a duty to get that money to our constituents and our farmers and those folks who feed the world. And with that, I yield back.
Any other member seek recognition? Hearing
Mr. Lamoff of California.
the gentleman from California, Mr. Lamafa, for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I seek to address a minute for
You're recognized.
the committee up to 5 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Your gentleman
I
is
think
recognized.
today's resolution on blueberries is a fine one, you know, recognizing that great product for its previously held month. I wish Mr. Crawford was here. We could throw one together on National Rice Month, which is currently September. I'm a rice grower in real life, but Mr. Chairman, I think I'd be remiss to not point out that the fires that are ravaging not only my district in Northern California, but other parts of California and the West have ravaged at least the area size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. And we need to have a very, very serious conversation upcoming in this committee. I hope that's something we can plan out at subcommittee level, what have you, on wildfire in the West and how devastating it is for, it even affects air quality here on the East Coast. You know, you have no exercise days happening in DC and Baltimore and New York previously. Sorry about my voice, sir, but we need to have the Forest Service be held much more accountable on how it does business. And we'll hear anecdotes about fire being set. Sometimes that's a good tool, sometimes it's a devastating tool. Backfires being set that ravage many, many more acres and homes and dwellings that didn't have to happen. We'll hear about issues of monitoring fires instead of attacking them in the very beginning, attacking them right out of the chute. We'll hear stories about conflicts between California state firefighting methods versus federal ones on federal lands. And so I really, I have, I agree with Mr. Kelly that indeed it's important to recognize our different crops like this. And, the timing of blueberries is unfortunate, but that's fine. But we got some very heavy duty work we need to be doing on our forestry in this country, as with a myriad of other topics as well. And the devastation, I lost the town of Paradise 3 years ago, part of the town of Redding, part of the town of Doyle this year, a big chunk of a town, Greenville, 75% of it is gone, and countless homes and ranches surrounding these areas that we're just not going to get back. People, they're looking at this as their exodus from California due to other reasons, but also these wooded areas. People ask, well, why do y'all got to live in those areas anyway? Why do you got to live out? You should just live in town. Just live in these planned communities, live in these walkable communities. Well, we need folks out in the field whether it's farming a crop, farming rice or blueberries. We need people up in the woods producing these timber and paper products. Heaven knows we use plenty of paper around here. We need people out there doing mining, and we just can't keep chasing them off the land like what we're doing, what it seems like is intentionally being done, chasing them out of those areas because we don't like people living in the woods. We want them all to live in a city somewhere. If no one here is producing, we're going to have to import it all. And we see the peril of importing all this rare earth products from China. Why in the world we're the number 2 importer of wood products in this country is beyond me when we're burning so much of it. Why do we have to import any of this? Why are we importing chips from China when we have 50,000 F-150s sitting in, I guess, Louisville, ready to go out on the line, and I can't even find a pickup at the dealership locally? We got to do some rethinking here, but sir, where our jurisdiction is on forestry and the direct oversight of the U.S. Forest Service, I hope we can engage that in the upcoming months and start planning for it right now. I yield back.
Is there any other member seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Baird, Indiana.
The gentleman from Indiana, for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to share my thoughts about...
Gentleman is recognized.
I just want to share my thoughts, and some of my colleagues have already touched on many of these, but you know, one of those is the Farm Bill of 2018, and we got another one coming up in 2023. And if you think about the timeline, we need to get started on that project and move in order to find solutions and then get legislation in order to make that effective, just like the 2018 Farm Bill. This idea that some of my other colleagues have mentioned, stepped up bases, capital gains taxes on farmers and small businesses are a real concern for those in my area. The conservation programs, we need to look at those and how we might use them and make that a benefit to farmers and ranchers. The carbon capture, what we might be doing, what farmers and ranchers have been doing. We need to recognize that and have those kind of programs incorporated into what we do. Someone mentioned the trade issues, and absolutely that's a concern because we need those other consumers to consume the products that we do raise. And we need tools to defeat and prevent African swine fever. We need to make sure that we can ensure that we provide a year-round marketplace for E15 ethanol and drives demand for more than a third of the U.S. corn crop. Turmoil in the beef markets, the fact that more than 70% of our ships are leaving the U.S. empty instead of carrying away empty containers and moving those back to China that loaded with our agricultural products. So the remarkable government overreach of the waters of the United States are just another issue. All of these are concerning and things that we should be working on. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Any other members seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Hearing no further.
He's on video.
Mr.
Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Bishop for offering up this day that we celebrate the blueberry industry. My district is a large portion of why Georgia's #1 in the blueberry industry, and they've been through a lot. We've had some issues with frost and other things, and it's been very difficult to get those folks help. But we need to recognize them and we need to help them because this is important to Georgia and the fact that our #1 industry is agriculture. I want to add too some things that must be addressed by this committee. At first is, there are grocery stores that cannot get products. I don't know if these, and of course, there's a lot of communication out there. In fact, there are people advertising on television about the food shortages, upcoming food shortages, which is creating some kind of a panic out there. And also, predicting this. And this committee needs to address this because, as I agree, that there has been a war on, and there is a ongoing war on every business out there, small business, you name it. The fossil fuel industry has been decimated. We're no longer energy independent. We've seen what gas prices have done. And let me tell you, I understand that natural gas prices have climbed substantially, and we're going into the winter season. And so how are people gonna heat their homes? We've got labor issues. Our president of Farm Bureau said the #1 problem in agriculture is labor issues. We can't, find people to work. None of our legal immigration systems are working. I've gotten calls on the H-2B program, H-2A program. I have a bill to support moving those programs to the USDA versus the Department of Labor so that we can make those programs readily available to our farmers rather than do everything we can to stop this process and make it more difficult for these people to produce their crops. When you combine all these things together, we've got serious issues in this country that we have to address, and we cannot ignore them. And are we going to have, like I said, we're no longer energy independent. We're begging Saudi Arabia to up production. That was not the case just 2 years ago. That is a critical piece of what this country is all about, and that's domination. And we're going to lose it in agriculture if we don't address these issues. And I appreciate what my colleagues have brought up here today. But Mr. Chairman, this is very serious business. These people are out there doing the best they can do under the circumstances. And rural America is being ignored. The broadband situation, we talked about that for, since I was on this committee. Cell service, for crying out loud. This country has the worst cell service. We're worse than third world nations. Mr. Chairman, there is a lot of work to do, a lot of bipartisan work to do on this committee. And I urge you to, let's come up with these priorities, bipartisan priorities, and let's tackle these things and solve these problems for the American people. And let's do what's right for the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Any other member seek recognition? Hearing none, no further discussion. Without objection, the committee will consider the whole amendment in the nature of a substitute. It will be open for amendment at any point. Amendments submitted in advance were emailed to members' offices last night and earlier this morning. Members will be responsible for having before them the text of any amendment. Now, does any member have any amendments? Hearing no further amendments or requests for recognition, I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that this bill be passed, and I urge passage of it. I hereby move that H-Res 271 as amended be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that the resolution be agreed to and the bill do pass.
The question now occurs on the motion. All those in favor of the resolution say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it and the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. We will now move on to the next bill on our agenda. We have before us the consideration of H.R. 2424, the Agricultural Affairs Rescue Act, sponsored by our colleague, the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Jimmy Panetta. Without question, the first reading of the bill is waived. It's open for amendment at any point. And now I recognize the sponsor of the bill, Mr. Panetta, to speak on his bill.
I cannot hear Mr. Panetta.
Is the chairman's microphone on? All right. Can you hear him now?
No.
We hear Mr. Panetta pretty clear, so Mr. Allen, it may be on your end down there. Check your mute button, I guess.
Mr. Chair.
There appears to be an audio issue with the microphones over Zoom.
Over Zoom?
We cannot hear Mr. Panetta.
Oh, really?
Perhaps
Let's,
the congressman could use a different microphone.
I was telling him I'm still on this. Here in this hearing.
How's this? Can you hear this one?
Yes, sir.
all right, everybody can hear? Is there anybody else out there can't hear? All right. We all can hear, Mr. Panetta. Proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Allen, for letting me know you couldn't hear me, but now you can, so I appreciate that. Look, this is a bill, the Agricultural Affairs Rescue Act is a bill that's going to provide much-needed federal relief funding to our local agricultural affairs, and it will promote our nation's agriculture. Look, I think there's probably many of you on this committee, I would imagine, more so on this committee than other committees, who've done what I do every year, and that's attend our livestock auctions at our local fairs and actually get out into the ring and are actually spotters. I think many of you would agree with me, it's an exhausting event. But I can tell you, if you're there at these auctions, it gives you so much energy. Why? Because you see it in the young men and women who are presenting their animals with such pride, especially as the bidding gets driven up. You see it in the parents who are so proud of those young men and women who've worked so hard to get their animals into shape. And you see it in the bidders who, yeah, most of the times are working in agriculture, who know that they are contributing to the future of those young men and women and the future of our agricultural communities. See, most of those 4-H and FFA members, they're going to use their proceeds to go to college. And a good amount of them will study agriculture. And some of them will come back home and continue working in agriculture, maybe even on their family farms. Now, I tell you that story because, one, many of you on this committee can relate to that, but it's what our agriculture fairs do. They emphasize our agriculture in our country, and they unify the people in our communities. Ever since fairs started back in the 19th century, they've maintained that dual aim of binding our communities and educating the people about agriculture. With most fairs retaining that cultural and educational spirit, farmers, ranchers, and local families use fairs to showcase all of their agricultural products and tools, from livestock to commodities to specialty crops to advances in mechanization to agricultural demonstrations and to sustainable farming. It's no wonder that fairs contribute $4.67 billion to our U.S. economy. Many fairs don't receive public funding, but instead rely on the revenues from attendees to fund maintenance activities. Now, prior to the pandemic, there were about 2,000 fairs that were held across this nation. Unfortunately, in 2020, COVID-19 closed 98% of all fairs in the United States, resulting in a revenue loss of $4.5 billion. While some fairs are back up and running this summer, the threat of the Delta variant has caused many fairs to scale down or remain closed. However, even without fairs and revenue from them, the fairgrounds still play a role in our community. We've seen it in California with our wildfires, the fairgrounds were used for basically places of refuge, not just for people, but for livestock. They were used during the pandemic for food banks and for vaccine sites. Although fairs weren't bringing in revenue, they still have to pay their bills. Our fairs help us. It's time that Congress has to help them. That's why I introduced the Bipartisan Agricultural Fairs Rescue Act with my colleagues Billy Long, Mike Levin, and Dan Newhouse. This same legislation was introduced in the Senate with Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota and Roy Blunt of Missouri. This bill would provide $500 million in grant funding each year of the pandemic for agricultural fairs. The USDA's AMS, Agricultural Marketing Service, would provide the grant funding to states or their departments of agriculture, who would then make grants to fairs prioritizing those that have faced the greatest financial hardship. This bill is supported by Democrats and Republicans, farmers and fair growers, the International and Western Fair Associations, and the National Association of Agricultural Departments. While this legislation will not make up all of our fairs' losses, it will provide critical support and help fairs fund maintenance and operations as they recover out of this bruising pandemic. Look, it will not just recognize our fairs. It provides relief to our rural communities, especially as they come out of COVID-19. I believe it's a small but important sign of what we can do on this committee, be it for the future of fairs, for the foundation of our communities, and to help fulfill our obligation to our country's agriculture. Once again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for having this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Panetta. Before we begin with any amendments, is there any member who wishes to speak on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I speak recognition to speak on the bill.
Mr. Harder?
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Recognition, I'm sorry.
No worries, thank you. I'm thrilled to support H.R. 2424, the Ag Fairs Rescue Act, before the committee today, because Representative Panetta and I have been working on this effort for over a year now. Fairs in the Central Valley aren't just one of the best times of the year, they're a vital part of our community. They employ hundreds of our workers, they generate millions in revenue for our businesses, and of course they let us show off the world's finest produce that we've got on hand. I'll be honest, I'm still proud of the blue ribbons that I won when I was a kid, and I can't imagine this new generation growing up without a chance to win some for themselves. Since the beginning of this pandemic, we've been fighting to ensure that our ag fairs have the support they needed to get through it all. Every day our fairs were closed just broke my heart. Recent studies put the losses in revenue from closed ag fairs close to $5 billion last year alone. We can't have another year where our ag fairs are shut down or unable to operate. Our farmers deserve better, our workers deserve better, and our families deserve better. And with cases of the Delta variant on the rise, we have to provide these ag fairs the support that they need. So I look forward to continuing to work with Mr. Panetta on this important issue. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, I yield back.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on it?
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized. 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, we have the Georgia National Fairgrounds and Agricultural Center just off I-75 in Perry, Georgia, where we have one of the largest fairs. I want to commend my colleague for the legislation and the way it's written. I want people to understand that it will be grants to the states and then based on, or the state departments of agriculture, and then based upon the loss, the states will then, make the grants to the local fairs. I think it's a good piece of legislation. I look forward to supporting it. I do want to point out, Mr. Chairman, the one thing that I was speaking about earlier that we received at 10 o'clock this morning, the language that will be voted on, not in this legislation, but today on the floor, Section 3101B of Title 31 United States Code shall not apply for the period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act and ending it on December 16th of 2022. And my question for you is it the intent of the Democratic Party to waive the debt limit to 2022, or is that an error and did they intend to do it to 2021?
Thank you very much. Is there any other gentleman wish to speak on the
Mr.
bill?
Chairman, I would just point out that I think there's an error in the language that we're going to be voting on today. Not this legislation with Mr. Panetta, but what the Dems have put on the floor. Surely they meant to waive the debt limit to December of 2021, not 2022.
Mr. Chairman, I'd
Thank
like
you.
to be recognized on the bill before the committee.
Any other gentleman?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, it's
I'd
still
like
my
to be
time,
recognized.
but I'll yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
This particular piece is good. The one on the floor today is very bad for the
right.
American farmer.
Thank you. Is there any other gentleman wish to speak? Gentleman from California, Mr. Costa. For what purpose is gentleman recognized?
Move to strike the last word and speak on
Gentleman
behalf of
is
the legislation.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to commend Mr. Panetta as a co-sponsor of this piece of legislation that reflects, I think, bipartisan support, not only in this committee, but the importance of fairs throughout our country. And I think Mr. Panetta made a very strong case on why this legislation is important and very necessary. The fact is that the fairs throughout our country have provided a backbone and a foundation for not only communities, but also for promoting American agriculture from very young to old alike. I think we all have experiences. I have 5 county fairs in my district. Like some of you, I, as a 4-H'er, participated in the county fairs. I still think I have some of my ribbons hidden somewhere. But the fact is they provide economic stimulus, they provide education for agriculture, and a multitude of purposes that are provided for in our fairs. They've been hard hit by this pandemic. They've lost tremendous revenues, and some of them wonder whether or not they can continue to function, even though they have for decades and decades throughout every state in our union. So this legislation will provide the economic opportunity to provide a lifeline. But as was noted, they also provide a multitude of other benefits for community activities that take place within our counties. They provide support that we've seen in terms of the pandemic in my communities, providing vaccines and providing testing. In providing a place in which the horrific fires that Congressman LaMalfa talked about for staging areas. So this legislation, for all those reasons, is important, and I urge that we support it and move it along. Let me also take an opportunity here to comment upon the conversation that we've had today. I've been on this committee for 17 years, and I've worked with all of you on a bipartisan basis. I've worked with chairmen who have been both Republican and Democratic, and I can tell you that in the conversations I've had with Chairman Scott, he clearly is sensitive to the challenges that we have been facing with regards to the division that has been caused as a result in part of reconciliation, but there are other factors that are involved in the divisions that we see before us today. And frankly, I know that the chairman, and I certainly do, and I think others, want to find an opportunity to heal some of these wounds and figure out how we can return to the bipartisan nature, which I think is incumbent upon all of us and has been the hallmark of this committee for decades, certainly the 17 years that I've been here. Yes, we have a farm bill that we need to consider and focus on. Yes, we have extreme drought conditions that we must focus on. Yes, we have issues that involve the disaster of the hurricanes and the flooding that have taken place. The swine flu continues to be a challenge, and we have other challenges that I need to work with my ranking member, Chairman Johnson, not Chairman Johnson, maybe someday, but on issues of livestock, dealing with the swine flu, dealing with the issues of the dairy industry. And these issues we must come together with, and I know Chairman Scott believes strongly that we should do that. And so when we get past these concerns that we've all heard today, let us pause and take a step to figure out how we return to the bipartisan comity of what has been the tradition of this committee. I know.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I'll yield.
Would you be willing to share with the Republican members of the committee the language of the conservation title that was passed out of the committee that spends $28 billion? If you want to have a bipartisan committee, Mr. Costa, if you would be willing to share that language on the conservation title, I think that would be a good start.
Well, that's a nice point that you raised, and I'm more than willing to have that conversation with you.
Have
My
you
friend-
seen the language,
Hold
Mr.
on
Costa?
a second. Would you let me complete?
Sure.
I yield it to you. That language is being currently worked on, and I think it needs to be shared. I raised that issue, as you may remember, in a previous committee when the conservation title was brought up. I indicated my concerns about it, that we had concerns with regards to the details on that, and I hope that we can do
But
that at
to
the
be clear,
appropriate
you have seen the
time.
language. You have seen the language, correct?
It is in the process of being worked on. I yield back.
Is there anyone else seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
Who is that? Gentleman from Georgia seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I'm not sure exactly whether I'm going to be able to support this piece of legislation. I got a lot of questions. For example, obviously in the fair industry, how much PPP money was available. There's a lot of money that has been allocated. I know the fair business, and one of my great privileges was to go through the chairs of the Exchange Club of Augusta, and as part of that, we have an agricultural fair. And art competition, you name it. It's all the things we do in our fairs. And we weren't able to do that last year. And I'm not sure what the decision is going to be this year. But certainly no one has asked me for assistance financially. Now, what we do with our proceeds from that fair is we give it back to the community. And I know that we have built some reserves and we continue to give funds back to our community. I attended the ceremony this past year as an invited guest. But, this is great. What I keep asking up here, how are we going to pay for all this stuff? I mean, how in the world is the greatest nation on the face of the earth facing right now $30 trillion of debt? That is insane to me. and makes no sense whatsoever. The greatest nation, we call ourselves the greatest nation on the face of the earth with that kind of debt, that kind of obligation that we're passing along to other generations. Sir, we need a lot more investigation as to how this is going to be paid for. And like I said, who's going to be next? Because it just seems like it's just one after the other. Let me tell you, everybody's been hurt with this thing. And, you get hurt, you dust yourself off, and you get back up and you get back at it. But now we've got a government that's going to say, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. Just let us know what you need. But then again, we can't tell anybody, we don't even have a plan to pay the money back. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And hey, I'm not talking just to my Democrat colleagues. I'm talking to my Republican colleagues here too. I mean, folks, this is insanity, and we must do something to at least tell the future generations of this country and the world that we got a plan and we're going to pay this money back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Any other member?
Mr. Chairman?
Chairman?
Ms. Custer, the gentlelady from New Hampshire seeks recognition. For what
Thank you,
purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes, Ms. Custer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to briefly express my strong support for Jimmy Panetta's bill on agricultural fairs. In New Hampshire and across the country, state and local agricultural fairs are family traditions for countless people. They provide wonderful opportunities for communities to gather, celebrate their region's rich agricultural heritage, and support local agribusiness, as my friends and neighbors did at the Hopkinton State Fair in my hometown just a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, agricultural fairs have been hard hit by the pandemic. 98% were canceled in 2020, and many are confronting reduced attendance this year as well with the Delta variant. Given their unique status as quasi-governmental entities, most have fallen through the cracks of previous federal COVID relief efforts.
Thanks.
This legislation will provide a critical lifeline to ensure that our agricultural fairs make it to the other side of this pandemic. And I know I speak for many when I say we can't wait to get back to the hayrides and cotton candy. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a bipartisan note. I know Mr. LaMalfa's district has been hard hit by the wildfires that are caused by the changes to our climate and the droughts. And I wanted him to know that we have hundreds of millions of dollars in relief for those wildfires in the disaster supplemental that will be attached to the continuing resolution that we'll vote on today. And I look forward to him joining us in that vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Ranking Member, Mr. Thompson seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Well, Chairman, I move to strike the last word, although that's a procedure for on the floor, not in committee. I'm obviously speaking on this bill. And I have talked with Mr. Panetta. The intent of his bill is great. Our number one show. Our agriculture fairs are the showcase for our number one industry. And in every state, this is the number one industry, agriculture. And we know that the key divide that we have for agriculture is the fact that too many people are too many generations removed from the farm, from those folks who produce our food, our fiber, our energy resources, our building materials. So the value of this is incredibly important. I wish this was a great example for regular order. This would have been a great point for discussion. Now, I've already told Jimmy I'm going to support his bill because the intent of it, it's important. Although if we'd have had a hearing, I think we'd had opportunity, and we'd have probably, because Jim and I had a good discussion, I guess it was last night in the hallway, just that one of the modifications I would have liked to seen is we would have required our governors to step up, and we'd have matched $1 up to the limit that he set in his text. We'd have matched every dollar for every CARES dollar. For example, we've got a governor in Pennsylvania who, even though it's the number one industry, is not incredibly supportive of the industry, but that would motivate him to put skin in the game for that number one industry. 1 out of every 7 jobs in Pennsylvania is directly or indirectly related to agriculture. So I'm going to offer my support. Having done that, though, this reconciliation bill certainly continues to be a burr in my saddle. I think it just speaks to, and I don't think it's the people in this committee, the Democrats, but I think it speaks to the Democratic leadership, just what they think about rural America. So we're talking now about spending $4.3 trillion, and less than $90 billion is for rural America and for agriculture specific. And of that, $0 is for production agriculture. So, I know you understand that, and I hope you understand where all this frustration is coming from, because we do better work than that as a team. And, if we, and then the whole $28 billion in conservation, and that really disturbs me, because now it's very clear to me that Democratic members know exactly what's being formed or what's being put in there. I'm the ranking member on this committee. I've gotten no information from the majority side and conservation is important. It's incredibly important. It's important to all of us. And to conduct ourselves, to allow others to dictate to us, and that's the way I'm viewing this, of defining what's in. That's a third of the bill of our part of this bill is undefined. We were asked to vote on a bill that was 1/3 incomplete. That, number one, we should have rejected that on principle. We didn't do that. That passed last Monday morning. We only go forward, and we're only a 3-member difference here. It is so close. The numbers have never been this close, right? I thought that was going to be a really good thing, because it would force us, to hold together, to join hands and to do what's right for rural America. But instead, we're seeing this dictated upon us from outside sources, whether it's the Democratic Majority and Rules Committee or the Budget Committee or the leadership. I don't know where it's coming from, because I can't get any information on this $28 billion that's been put together. That's not. And it's really impeding trust and teamwork in this committee, and I fear for that going forward, because we got a lot of work that we need to do. We have a farm bill that we should have been doing hearings starting 18 months ago. We have a food supply chain disruption that we all lived through in 2020, and it's continuing into 2021, that we need to learn from that and build resiliency. We've got our livestock issues. We have threats of this African swine virus. We're surrounded with these threats to rural America and to our ability to provide food and fiber for ourselves. And so I just can't emphasize how disappointed I am that it's very apparent that the Democratic members of the Agriculture Committee have some feel for at least the direction, the form of this $28 billion in conservation. And myself as ranking member and all the Republican members are left absolutely clueless. The first time we're going to see it, and when it's jammed into this $4.3 trillion bill. So with that, I yield back and give 8 seconds back.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Is there any other member? The gentlelady from North Carolina, our vice chair, seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman?
I'd like to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized for 5 minutes, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. As I've said, my district is substantially urban and suburban, but I do understand how important agricultural fairs are to my home state of North Carolina, mostly organized by nonprofits. North Carolina agricultural fairs provide an opportunity for our young children to engage with our farmers. In 2020, 37 fairs were scheduled and not a single one occurred as planned because of the pandemic. This cost North Carolina billions of dollars in revenue, according to the North Carolina Association of Agricultural Fairs. And so here we are, over halfway into 2021. The pandemic is still raging, and And so so far, 6 fairs have been canceled already. So the loss from the cancellation of all North Carolina agricultural fairs in 2020 was around $30 million in ticket sales alone. And so that's why this bill is critically important, making whole the agricultural fairs industry, which supports the thousands of jobs and generates $4.67 billion for the U.S. economy each and every year. So I appreciate my colleague for sponsoring this bill. I'm proud to support this bipartisan bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it as well. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Anyone else?
Chairman.
Is that Mr. Baird there?
Hagedorn.
Mr. Hagedorn.
Hagedorn.
I'm sorry. For what purpose does the
I'd
gentleman?
like to speak on behalf of the bill.
You're recognized
Thank
for
you.
5
I
minutes.
want to thank my colleague, Mr. Panetta, for bringing this bill to us. I do agree with our ranking member, Mr. Thompson, that we would have benefited from a hearing and perhaps been able to incorporate even better ideas and get a better price tag. I don't know if the $500 million is warranted. Hopefully, if it's not, the money can be saved and not spent. But these county fairs are very important. We have 21 counties in my district. All of them have a county fair. I think I've been to each of them at least 4 times over the past many years. And whether it's the vendors, the local businesses, I mean, the entertainment's great for the locals, and then of course, really the best is the 4-H'ers, and they're showing their animals and the auctions and everything. It's really quite something. Part of the problem we have, and I wish this had been brought to us earlier, this bill, because there have been counties and these boards that have been struggling. But part of the problem is that in the Small Business Committee, which I serve on, we thought we had this kind of resolved, or at least it was in a bill a while back. The shuttered venue operator grants, we thought this was going to be covered, and all of a sudden it went to the Senate, and I think the majority leader over there decided that the rural folks weren't going to get the money and it was going to go to other areas. So at least, I guess, better late than never. Again, I appreciate my colleague and his bipartisanship, and hopefully this will do the job. With that, I yield back.
You're back. Anyone else? Any other? The gentleman from California, Mr. Garbahal.
Thank you,
For
Mr.
what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I'd like to speak for 5 minutes, please.
You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Representative Panetta for bringing this legislation, bipartisan legislation, forward. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of it as well. In my district, I have a number of agriculture fairs as well. The number one industry in my district is agriculture. And as such, these fairs continue to play a vital role on a number of reasons. First, they contribute to our economy by providing jobs. They support education for our 4-H'ers and our FFA students. And they actually contribute significantly to our local economy. In my district, I have fairs in Ventura, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, and Paso. And I think this legislation is going to provide a lifeline to fairs like those in my district to transcend and get beyond this pandemic, the impacts that they've experienced. So I'm 100% supportive of this legislation, and I want to thank my colleague for bringing this forward. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Any other members seek recognition? Here, no further discussion. Without objection, H.R. 2424 is now open for amendments. Do any members have any amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Panetta has offered an amendment. The clerk will report the title of the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 2424 offered by Mr. Panetta of California.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. Mr. Panetta is now recognized to speak on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment, which was handed out to members or distributed last night, would make technical timing changes to the legislation to better reflect are placed in the calendar and fiscal year. The underlying legislation currently instructs the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture to provide grants to agricultural fairs no later than September 30th, 2021. This amendment would strike that date and require the Secretary to provide grants no later than 180 days after funds have been appropriated. This amendment would also permit the funds to be dispersed and utilized beginning in fiscal year 2022 instead of fiscal year 2021 as described in the underlying bill. Once again, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does any other member seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Here, no further conversation. The question is on the amendment. Members are reminded again to unmute themselves and appear on the screen when they are called on to vote. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Is there any further debate on amendment or on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Mr. Lawson, you have an amendment?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lawson has offered an amendment. The clerk will report the title.
Amendment to H.R. 2424, offered by Mr. Lawson of Florida.
Mr. Lawson, you're recognized to speak on your amendment. Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, I can appreciate Congressman Pinella for drafting this bill. It could negatively impact Florida fairs. I've been going to fairs, state fairs ever since 7th and 8th grade, basically all the way through high school. And I would tell Austin Scott I've been to one even in Perry, Georgia. Most all of these fairs was not eligible for funds through the CARE Act or the American Rescue Plan. And so we're really kind of devastating in the behalf. Unlike most states where the normal schedule is May through November for the fair of Florida, fair schedules run from September to November and then January to April to avoid the excessive heat. Therefore, some of the fairs in Florida was able to open from January to March in 2020 before the emergency order was put into effect. By only comparing 2020 attendance dates to the last 3 years, that could unintentionally penalize Florida fairs that was open in 2020, but faced significant attendance and revenue decline in 2021. As the third largest state, it is valid that Florida fairs receive relief proportionate to the loss they experienced due to the pandemic. What I would like to have, this is an important bill, is verbal confirmation from the chairman, the sponsor of these bills, that he will work with me and my staff on this.
Are we supposed to attend?
I think someone is cutting across me. Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, I need verbal confirmation from the sponsors of this amendment, from the bill, that they will work with me and the staff on this particular issue because it's critically important to the state of Florida.
Does the gentleman yield to Mr. Panetta?
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lawson. I want to thank you for raising this issue. Look, I think while the bulk of losses in states have been in 2020, I do appreciate you bringing this issue, highlighting this issue, and I appreciate Florida's unique circumstances and want to ensure that they are not shortchanged. I recognize that they are facing increasing challenges due to the time of their fairs and the Delta variant, and I appreciate his offer and hopefully withdrawal of this amendment and want to commit to him to work with him to address this issue. I believe this amendment has merit, but want to engage with our broader stakeholders to ensure that the solution is the right one. Again, I would like to thank Mr. Lawson for his support for agricultural fairs in Florida and throughout his country, and you have my commitment now. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Panetta. Thank you, Mr. Lawson.
The time belongs to Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Lawson, do you have time remaining?
Mr. Chairman, I would withdraw this amendment. Look forward to working with him in this regard.
Thank you. Is there any further, the amendment has been withdrawn. Is there any further debate on the amendments or on the bill? Hearing no further amendments or requests for recognition, I now recognize the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, for a motion. Mr. Panetta, you are recognized.
I hereby move that H.R. 2424 as amended be reported favorably to the House with the recommendation that the resolution be agreed to and the bill do pass.
The question now occurs on the motion. All those in favor of the bill will say aye.
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 Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Next. Conclusion. There are no, so we'll go straight to the conclusion.
Okay.
Yep, right here.
Okay. Does any member wish to file supplemental, additional, dissenting, or minority views on either H.R. 271 or H.R. 2424? If so, please have them submitted to the clerk's office, 1303 Longworth, by 5 p.m. on Friday, September 24th. Without question, the usual instructions are given to the staff that consists of making such technical, clarifying, or conforming changes as are appropriate without changing any of the substance of the legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, this concludes today's business meeting, and I thank all members, and this meeting is adjourned.